Billionaire catches Black Maid in the act with his disabled son, and he screams. The scream echoed through the marble hallway before anyone could stop it. What are you doing? The silver tray hit the floor. Upstairs, in the east wing of the Caldwell estate, a door stood half open. Inside, sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating a scene that made billionaire tech investor Richard Caldwell see red. His son, 8-year-old Daniel, was standing, and holding both hands of the family's maid. For most parents, that sight would mean nothing. For Richard, it meant everything. Because Daniel wasn't supposed to be able to stand. Doctors had used phrases like limited mobility, neurological impairment, lifelong assistance. Richard had spent millions consulting specialists from New York City to London, flying private to rehabilitation centers in Toronto. He had built therapy rooms inside his mansion, installed custom railings, bought advanced exoskeleton devices, and yet, every attempt ended the same way, Daniel slumping back into his wheelchair, exhausted and discouraged. Richard had stopped hoping, so when he saw his son trembling on unsteady legs, supported only by the housemaid's hands, he panicked. Get away from him, Richard roared. The woman turned. Her name was Naomi. She was in her early 30s, tall, composed, with warm brown skin and eyes that rarely met his directly. She had worked in the Caldwell household for 9 months, quiet, efficient, invisible in the way domestic workers often become in large homes. She froze when she heard him scream. Daniel flinched, and then Daniel fell. Richard lunged forward, catching his son before he hit the floor. Are you okay? He asked urgently, scanning for injury. Daniel's breath came fast, not from pain, but from fear. I was just. Richard's glare shot toward Naomi. What did you think you were doing? Naomi swallowed but did not step back. He asked me to help him, she said softly. You are not a physical therapist, Richard snapped. No, sir. Then you have no right. Daddy, Daniel interrupted quietly. Richard turned. Daniel's small fingers tightened around his shirt. I almost did it. Richard blinked. Did what? Daniel's voice trembled, but not from fear this time. I almost walked. The room went silent. Richard looked from his son to Naomi. She did not look triumphant. She looked worried. I would never endanger him, she said carefully. Richard stood, lifting Daniel gently into his wheelchair. His pulse pounded in his ears. You expect me to believe that? Naomi hesitated. Then she did something unexpected. She knelt to Daniel's eye level. Do you want to tell him? She asked gently, or should I? Daniel's eyes flickered to his father. I asked her not to tell, he whispered. Richard felt something twist inside his chest. Tell me what? He demanded. Daniel looked down at his legs. About the mornings. Richard frowned. What mornings? Naomi stood slowly. For the past 6 weeks, she said quietly, Daniel has been waking up 30 minutes earlier than scheduled therapy. Richard stared at her. He asked if I would sit with him. Just sit, at first. And then he asked if I would hold his hands while he tried to stand. Richard's voice turned icy. Without medical supervision, Naomi met his gaze steadily. With support and patience. You overstepped. Yes, she said. The honesty caught him off guard. But he needed someone who wasn't watching a stopwatch. The words hung in the air. Richard felt anger rising again. You think I don't care about my own son? No, Naomi said quickly. I think you care very much. Her voice did not accuse. It acknowledged. He's been surrounded by equipment, she continued gently. Machines, schedules, specialists. Richard's jaw tightened. And he wanted someone who believed he could stand before he actually did. Daniel's fingers moved restlessly in his lap. I didn't want doctors watching me fall, he said softly. Richard turned slowly toward him. You could have gotten hurt. Daniel nodded. I know. Then why? Daniel's eyes shimmered. Because when they watch, it feels like I'm already failing. Silence settled heavier than marble. Richard swallowed. He remembered the therapist's charts, the clinical notes, the cautious optimism that faded year after year. Naomi spoke again, gently. He doesn't need pressure. He needs permission. Permission for what? To try without disappointing you. The words hit harder than any accusation. Richard stepped back slightly, as if struck. I have never been disappointed in him, he said quietly. Naomi nodded. He knows that, but he doesn't know if you still believe. Richard looked at his son. Daniel avoided his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Richard asked. Daniel's voice cracked. Because when it doesn't work, you look like someone took something from you. Richard felt his breath leave him. In boardrooms across Silicon Valley, he was feared, calculated, controlled, a man who built empires from nothing. But here, inside his son's bedroom, he felt unprepared. Naomi stepped aside slightly. He stood for 12 seconds this morning, she said quietly. Richard looked at Daniel. 12. Daniel nodded. And yesterday. 8. Richard's throat tightened. Naomi gestured toward the walker positioned near the bed. He was trying again when you came in. Richard stared at the metal frame. His first instinct had been rage. Protection. Control. Now something else crept in. Possibility. Show me, Richard said hoarsely. Daniel looked unsure. Naomi crouched beside him. Only if you want to. Daniel looked at his father. Richard forced his voice softer than he'd used in years. I'm not timing you. Daniel swallowed. Okay. Naomi helped him shift forward in his chair. She positioned his feet carefully, whispering instructions in a voice so calm it seemed to slow the air itself. Richard hovered nearby, resisting the urge to intervene. Daniel gripped Naomi's hands. One breath, she said. Daniel inhaled. And up. He pushed. His legs trembled violently. Richard felt his own knees weaken watching. For a second, it looked like before. Like every failed attempt. But Naomi did not tighten her grip. She adjusted. Slightly. Not lifting. Balancing. Daniel straightened. His knees locked. He was standing. Not fully upright. Not steady. But standing. Richard's eyes blurred. Daddy. Daniel whispered. Richard stepped closer. I'm here. Don't catch me. The request pierced him. He nodded slowly. I won't. Seconds stretched. 5, 7, 10. Daniel's arms shook. But he didn't collapse. Naomi's voice stayed even. You're doing it. 15 seconds. Richard's hands hovered uselessly at his sides. 20. Daniel exhaled sharply and eased back into the chair. The room was silent. Richard realized he had been holding his breath. Daniel looked up cautiously. Was that bad? Richard shook his head quickly. No, he whispered. His voice broke. That was incredible. Daniel's face shifted. Confusion, then hope. Naomi stepped back respectfully. Richard crouched in front of his son. I should have seen it, he murmured. Daniel tilted his head. Seen what? That you didn't need more machines, Richard said. You needed more belief. Daniel smiled faintly. Naomi turned slightly toward the window, giving them space. After a long moment, Richard stood. He faced her. I was wrong to scream. She nodded once. I understand. No, he said firmly. You don't. He paused. I've built companies from nothing. I control outcomes. That's how I survive. Naomi listened quietly. But this, he looked at Daniel. This is something I couldn't fix with money. No, she agreed gently. You risked your job. Yes. Why? Naomi hesitated. Then she said something that changed the room again. Because I grew up with a brother who was told he wouldn't walk either. Richard blinked. He did, she said softly. Eventually. Not because doctors predicted it. Because someone refused to treat him like he was fragile glass. Richard felt shame creep in, slow and heavy. I never wanted him to feel fragile, he whispered. He doesn't, Naomi said. He feels watched. Richard looked at his son again. Daniel was staring at his own legs. Not with defeat, with curiosity. How long? Richard asked quietly. Have you believed he could do this? Naomi smiled faintly. Since the first morning he asked. And you didn't tell me. He asked me not to. Richard nodded slowly. Trust. Daniel had trusted her, not because she was staff, but because she was steady. Richard straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow, he said carefully, we'll adjust his therapy schedule. Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. No more timers, he added. Daniel's eyes widened. And, Richard continued, turning to Naomi, I would like you to be there. Naomi hesitated. As what? She asked softly. Richard considered the question. Not as a maid, not as staff, as someone he trusts. Daniel grinned. Can we try again later? He asked eagerly. Richard looked at Naomi. She nodded gently. After lunch, she said. Richard exhaled slowly. the earlier rage now replaced by something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope. He moved toward the doorway. Then he stopped. Naomi. Yes, sir. He shook his head. Richard. She studied him for a moment. Then nodded. Richard. Outside the room, the hallway felt different. The scream that had echoed earlier now felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Inside, Daniel adjusted himself in the chair, already preparing mentally for another attempt. Naomi stood beside him, not pushing, not pulling, just present, and for the first time in a long while, Richard didn't feel like a billionaire trying to buy a miracle. He felt like a father watching one unfold.